Okay, we are live and we can see, I don't know if you guys can see on your screens, but I can see on mine how many people are watching. Renata, can you see that on your screen?
No, we don't. I don't have anything.
Okay, great. So we'll wait for a few minutes. Usually it takes a few minutes to get people to log on. I have some banners that I'll be showing throughout of just, with your name and your website so people can have that. But we'll just kind of wait. And for those who are watching, or if you're joining and sort of watching from the beginning, I was able to also enable comments on our YouTube channel. So this is being streamed to a private Facebook group for the Scarsdale Teachers Institute, and it's also being live streamed to the Yellow Farmhouse Education YouTube channel. And through lots of trial and error, I'm sort of figuring out the ins and outs of how that works. But now you can comment on the YouTube channel either via the comments below, or it looks like there's a chat on the right side of the YouTube channel. And so either location you can make comments and we'll be able to see them in our, or I'll be able to see them in my comment stream, as will Laura, who is behind the scenes. And as if we don't have enough technology platforms, she'll be sharing. If you ever see me looking down at my phone, it's to see if there's a question or a comment that I might have missed. So I'm going to keep that handy. But it looks like we have a couple people watching, and I'm just looking for the time on here, which for some reason is not showing up anymore. Oh, okay, and Laura's going to show me what it looks like on YouTube. But I think we can go ahead and get started. We've got about 5 people watching, and a lot of people, because this saves in the Facebook group and it also saves on YouTube, we're able to keep it there. So, so I think we'll start. So Renata is here with me. Hi, Renata.
Hello.
And we're joined by Whitner Caplanson and Molly Peterson, both really amazing photographers and storytellers that focus, or one area of focus is food and farming for your work. And so as we explained to the group on Monday, when we were sharing a little bit about what this week would look like in terms of the content and the goals of the resources that we're sharing, the idea today is to talk about how you can use photography, or how you can capture food stories through photography, or the kinds of stories that you guys are hoping to tell. But I thought maybe we could start by, if you could each kind of introduce yourself and tell a little bit about how you came into the work that you're doing and the focus that you have on food and farming, and a little bit about your where you share your work, and how, and Whitner in particular with the Connecticut Food and Farm, a little bit about that work as well. So maybe Whitner, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. So I was a classroom teacher for 22 years, and sort of at the same time as that, I always had a side hustle, and one of those side hustles was launching a farmer's market in the town where I was living at the time. And my role in that organization was basically marketing and promotions and dealing with the media. So part of that process is we used photography to market the market. I started using a camera that I still, wasn't very good at it. Other photographers became involved because it was really fun, and their photos were even better. So they taught me a lot just by watching them work. But the market became so successful that we actually had to take a step back toward promoting more people coming to the market, because it was actually traffic jams and super frustrating for people. So we started marketing the places where the farmer's food could be found other than at the market. And one of those places was restaurants. And so I had a photographer coming with me to shoot a chef who came in for brunch on a Sunday, which, if anyone knows chefs, that's like, they don't even do that. And just before we were supposed to leave to head to the restaurant, that photographer called me and said, my kiddo's sick, I can't make it. And I was like, I can't do this by myself, I'm not good enough. But I don't know if I can say this really in this group, but my husband said, when you get there and you see your friends, shot in a beer. Like, get really do shot in a beer. You know how to do this, so just take the edge off and go in there and do your work. And from that moment, I was hooked, and that became the focus of my work. And when I retired from teaching, I became full-time photographer.
Amazing.
So you mentioned also, I publish a magazine. It's called Connecticut Food and Farm Magazine. So the commercial side, what I do is Connecticut Food and Farm, and then the nonprofit side is Connecticut Food and Farm Magazine, and that is an online magazine published through Issue. It gets about 25,000 reads per issue, so it's very, very widely read. But the entire focus, there's no advertising in it at all. The entire focus is to promote aspects of the Connecticut food and farm scene, basically farm to table stuff.
Amazing. Thank you. And Molly, I'm going to get you on the screen now and change the banner here for your website. You want to tell us a little bit about how you came into your work and sort of your background?
Sure. So I'll go back like about 12 years. My husband and I moved to Virginia. He was a chef at the time. And we moved to a little tiny rural town with no cell coverage. And I thought, and I was really young and probably naive. And I said, I'm going to be self-employed. Well, the problem is you're in the middle of nowhere, but I was going to do it. And so I just got out there, and I'd been shooting my whole life, but in the town, there was a little regional food magazine. And I reached out to them and I said, I saw your recent issue and I know you can do better and you should hire me, which was not, I normally am not so bold, or at least at that age I wasn't. And they said, yes, you're right. We need you. So he was a chef and he was cooking for a very high-end, now Michelin-starred restaurant. And I was shooting and for this little magazine and picking up other little jobs here and there. And then while we were doing that, he decided to become a farm intern on a pasture-based livestock farm. And if you know anything about that, I said, so how much does that make? Not much. Yeah. And so here I was, very self-employed, and he was an intern, and you'd be surprised how little you can live off of when you're 20 and together and young. So he was doing that, and I was doing that. And then what ended up happening is, as I kept shooting and meeting more and more farmers, I fell more and more in love with photographing farmers and food, and telling that story. So then I started working more with the farm that he was working at. And then after several years, we actually ended up buying that farm business. So for 4 years, he and I then had a pasture-based livestock farm together. And so during that time, I was marketing our own farm through all the ways that you market farm. But my favorite part of that was telling our story, even if whether it was with my phone, with Instagram, or with my reel camera, it was sharing that. And it was sharing my heart and our heart and everything that we put into it. During that time, I was also, a lot of my photos were being used for the Farm Aid concerts. If you've ever gone to the Farm Aid concert, you see the photos in the background. You might even have some too, I think. Or maybe I've seen them, or anyway, I know I've seen your stuff around. And then I've had several, I think I've been in 9 or 10 cookbooks now. So one book, I traveled with a fellow farmer. We went to 19 farms across the country. So it just, it's been interesting over the years, just as I've been able to more and more shoot what really makes my heart happy is what has had the biggest impact. So that's kind of the shortened version of how it got there.
Thank you both.
Stories, and I love how they're so different that you both do not exactly the same work, but similar work, and you both came from such different backgrounds.
Why, or what is it? I'm trying to think what the next question is. And by the way, if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask, please make sure to add it into the comment. But I'm curious about when you approach either a farm or a farmer, or if you're photographing food, what are you looking for in terms of the story that you're trying to tell, or how do you begin the process of sort of figuring out the way that you're going to take your photographs?
I'll jump in. It's not so different than when I was a classroom teacher and you're looking at this group of kids and you don't see a sea of kids, you see individual kids. You know, that one's the shining star. That one's the unpolished gem. That one needs a little encouragement. So, you know, whether it's food on a plate or whether I'm at a farm shooting with a farmer, I'm always looking for, you know, what's the story here? What's the gem to be uncovered? When does that farmer's eyes absolutely sparkle and light up? They're so excited about this. Like, you know, that's the part that I really want to capture.
Absolutely. I mean, and then you like, you see the light up and inside you go, it's like, you almost want to be like, okay.
Right.
And you don't want to be like too excited. It might scare them. But yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Are you kind of like, sometimes I try not to read up too much about them before, because I don't want to come in with like a plan. I want to let it evolve on its own too. And like you said, like the story, you know, you're kind of like, so what about this or what about that? And then they go, oh, for that book I did, the bigger book, we were in Dallas with some urban honeybee keepers. And one of them was a U.S. Olympian for soccer. And he got injured and somehow or another became a beekeeper. And he was so, and all of them were like this, but he was so alive, right? And he was like, he was so like jumping, kind of like a bee, you know, when he could talk about everything. And it was just like, that's the kind of stuff that just makes you so love what you're doing.
Yeah.
And how much are you thinking of the viewer when you're taking photographs? Are you thinking about, what are you hoping to, I guess it's different with each story that you're trying to tell, but where I mean, you're sort of in between, you know, you have the sort of the farm or the farmer or the food on one side and the person that you're going to be telling that story to.
Right. So again, in teacher language, it's zone of proximal development, right? Where your viewer is and where you want to take them to. So 2 quick examples in the last week. I photographed a farmer with a pack of fluid on his back, and he was spraying. Like most consumers would be like, oh my God, it's chemicals. Nope. They're farming organically. They need to add boron to the soil. A small bit of boron is going to help the uptake of nutrients into the beets. So that was a picture I really wanted to take so I could tell that story. I also took a picture this week. It was golden hour shoot with a farmer. She's beautiful. The farm's beautiful. The day was beautiful. But one of the things that happened while we were there, she went in to feed the chickens. Oh, there's a dead chicken. She's holding the dead chicken by the feet. And her dog is sniffing that chicken head. I wanted that picture because at some point, the million suburban people that are about to launch into keeping chickens, I want to be able to say, hey guys, just so you know, chickens die. They just do. And I want that picture because I want to kind of move my readers and my followers along in a more knowledgeable place about the local food system. So I'm always thinking about what comes next, but I'm definitely thinking about, I think of my pictures as they're real and they're true, but they're the gilded version, right? They're the most beautiful version of the truth. So I'm obviously, just like Molly, trying to make the pictures beautiful and using my skills as a photographer to light properly, to make eyes sparkle, all those things as well.
Yeah.
Would you add anything to that?
I did. That's exactly it. I mean, people don't, especially being a farmer too. I've often been quoted as saying, like, farming can be the most soul fulfilling and soul crushing, and often in the same day. Like you can go from like whoa, and hopefully it's like the soul fulfilling and it comes at the end of the day. To kind of make you go, okay. So it's not easy stuff. I mean, and it really is. Any kind of weather and every day, like it doesn't matter. And farmers are out there and they are the farmers that I know, majority of them at least, are some of the most genuine people you're ever going to meet.
Yeah.
And they just want to feed their community. That's all. And their families. They want to take care of their families and they want to feed their communities. It's like the most pure, genuine, authentic, loving thing is to want to feed somebody. And so it's yeah, but so it's also, yeah, showing those realities to show like, listen, these guys are heroes, or, you know, whatever you want to call them. And the beauty that can happen in all versions of life. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I try to look too for personal work opportunities that are photographing things that, you know, a marketer's never going to hire me to photograph for a magazine or for, you know, or for a website or something. And a quick example of that is I've done a project the last 3 early springs called From Last Snow to Bud Break. So we think about the consumer, the average consumer knows about maple sugaring, and then they pretty much next know about asparagus. They really don't have any sense of what's happening at farms in between. And if they do visualize baby animals, Molly, just like you're talking about, they visualize them on a day like this, where there's lofty green grass and puffy blue clouds in the sky. And in reality, no, I mean, lambs are dropping in sub-zero weather and, you know, all kinds of stuff. Hard things are happening, beautiful and hard things.
I have photos of my husband carrying a calf in an ice storm, and it's like coming sideways, which also means I'm out there too. And
right.
And you're putting them in either your car or your basement, like wherever you can. Like, you're shoving them in your clothes. You're sharing your coat with it instead of you. Yeah.
Those are amazing stories to tell. And I think even to that time of year, there's no time of year, in my opinion, that farmers are more hopeful and more unsure. You know, it's all, the whole season is still ahead. So, so again, those are the stories that I love to hire myself to shoot.
That makes sense. That makes sense. We have a couple of logistical questions people have about the kind of equipment that you use, whether or not you edit your photos digitally, and also how you got your start. Did you have training or special classes, or did you just sort of feel like you had a knack for it from the beginning?
Molly, you go first.
Okay. So what equipment?
So what equipment?
Yeah, for equipment, I keep it really simple. Especially now that I have 2 kids with me. Usually now, equipment's heavy. Equipment can break, so I keep it really, really simple for me, because I've done the like lug it all out there, and then you're like, what am I doing? So my bag is very small. I don't have it. I thought maybe I had it close. I don't have it small. It's very small. I have 1 camera and a few lenses. Over time, I've honed it in where I know kind of my 3 key lenses. Even the 70 to 200, you know, usually that big one that everyone sees, the white Canon. It's heavy, so I don't always bring it with unless I know that I may need it.
Yeah.
It's also very expensive. So, so I keep camera equipment really light. As far, or my phone. It depends on my intention, right? If it was really just for my farm's Instagram, most phones are really okay to use. Like, I hate to say that sometimes because that's my profession, is using a real camera, but oftentimes it's going to help tell the story. Do I edit them digitally? Very minimally. When I learned to shoot digitally, it was get it right in the camera, and then if you need a little tweaking later, do that. You know, sometimes it's the color balance is a little off. Like, I'm looking at my screen, I'm very blue right now. That's just my office. I may, you know, there's some translation lost from the actual to the camera, so I'll try to bring it back in the computer. Not much is lost, but like a little bit more saturation, or a little bit. I know if I shoot raw, which will be a foreign term to a lot of people, I can bring in some highlights that I may have lost. So did I have a feel for it? I have photos of me that I've taken. I just went through my mom's house and all the photos from like my early subjects when I was a kid, was like setting up my little horses in the grass in the yard and taking pictures of that. So, or my dogs. So that's always what I've been drawn to. I did go to school for photography. It was a 2-year degree. It was kind of a general degree, photography-wise, an associate's, and then I worked for a wedding and event photographer in Colorado for several years. I was her office manager, and then I shot for her too. But it wasn't necessarily the food farm thing, but I still absolutely relevant. You know, if you can shoot a wedding, which has like every lighting and emotion possible, then it easily translates over to this. So that's kind of, you know, and when you're shooting when I shoot a wedding, it gives me other ideas for maybe when I shoot the editorial stuff too. It all, and over time, and I'm sure Winter can attest to this, like, I'm not always thinking about my settings anymore. It's natural, right? It's just like, oh yeah. And sometimes I'm off, sure. But most of the time you go, oh, I know what exposure that's going to be, probably.
Yeah.
And it just becomes, my camera's just a part of my body at this point.
Yeah.
I like your point about not having a big camera bag. I literally have a canvas knapsack. If I'm going to be shooting outdoors primarily, but might need to tuck inside, my outdoor lens is a 28-300. It wasn't an expensive lens. At this point, I think it's so dirty inside the lens that it actually makes some amazing like light refractions that are super weird because it's so well used, and it's just, I know it's dirty inside. I'll keep a little 50, a really small, light, inexpensive 50, and I have a vintage wide angle lens that I keep in my bag that's also very, very light. But if I'm going to be outdoors, that's all I need. I always have a flash with me because you need to light properly. Lighting something properly is really, really important. But I definitely never travel with, I don't even travel with a softbox. I travel with a pop-up umbrella, just really simple. Part of that is because I don't want to overwhelm and intimidate the people that I'm spending time with. Most of the farmers and makers and so on, they are not familiar with being photographed, and I don't want to make them feel like this is a super big deal. I want them to forget the camera. If I am shooting food, I have 3 lenses with me. I have a 105 macro. That's my favorite food lens. I have a 50 if I need to shoot wider, and I have a 35 if I need to shoot like a whole table. And those are the only 3 lenses that I take to a food shoot. Similarly, I take 1 flash. I take a pop-up, just an umbrella. I do have my camera body is a Nikon D5. I haven't explored mirrorless at all, but we do, if you are shooting food and you're shooting events, if events ever come back, you tend to find yourself in low light and needing fast action. So say to catch a drip or to catch, something running. So a camera that is for photojournalists, for sports photographers, is going to be the camera that gives you that kind of ability rather than what wedding photographers are looking for, because they need really gigantic files and we don't really need that as much. So I, again, in adding to my background, I come at this as a food person. I come at this as someone who is a cheerleader of local food. So, I used to run a market, promote a market, deal with the media. Now I do photography. I absolutely love it. But to me, it's just a tool to tell the story of local food. If there is a point at, sometime in the future where the power of images isn't as significant as the power of the pen, I was an English teacher. I'll go back to writing. I'll write about food. So I took a very simple how to use your DSLR class at a local photography shop, and that's it. And then from there, I just kind of learn as I go.
So I think we have to wrap up because we're moving on to our next guest. But I did want to ask one final question, unless Renata, you had something to ask. But my question was right now, in this moment in time, what do you think the most important or food story is to tell, or the most important sort of realization that you've had in the last couple of weeks about food and your role in telling that story?
Farmers have a tremendous opportunity right now. What I'm hearing from everyone who sells direct to the public is that their sales are up 40 to 60%, with most of those sales being people who have never purchased directly from a farmer before. So this, just like any product that receives that kind of boon, this is an amazing moment to enchant and to just delight those customers so that a portion of them, hopefully a good chunk of them, remain direct consumers in the local food system. And this all happened so very quickly that the importance of putting into play what is your public facing, what do your posts look like on Instagram? What do they look like on Facebook? What are you writing? What do the images look like? This is a moment to get a grip and to really think about that. I've seen a couple of posts from farmers basically saying, where you been all my life? I've been here. I've been working hard. Where have you been? And I need you to buy from me, not just today, but in the future. And unfortunately, that's not the way the consumer mind works. Right now, they're in love. The consumers are in love with the farmers. I suspended publication for the summer issue of my magazine because nothing I would normally write about is in play right now. And instead, we've been publishing field guides to local food. So field guides to local meat, field guides to dairy farms that sell cow's milk directly to consumers, field guides to CSAs. And so those, and making them beautiful, like a magazine with gorgeous photography and so on. So this is our opportunity to really make the consumer a long-lasting customer rather than a flash in the pan because of a pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sad we don't have our own farm right now. You know, it's like kind of this sick irony to not have my own food to eat at the moment. But there are a lot of reasons why we had to close the farm, but one of them is we tried so hard, you know, we tried so hard. And even with all the marketing that I did, even though I was ahead of the curve on a lot of our peers, that's not always enough. Like, telling the story is so important. And most of our business came because of the way I told the story. You know, we had customers who said, I just get on here to look at your photos because it just makes me feel good. And then I remember to order, you know? But absolutely what's the most important is by telling those stories and hooking their hearts in a positive way. Not like, I'm going to take your money, but like, let's connect together. Let's do this co-creation thing together because I need you if I'm going to farm and you need me if you want to eat. Like, let's do this together. Is so important. Like you said, not just now, but always. We lived in a pretty transient area, so we had a lot of government and military in and out, you know, like that's how we lost a lot of our customers. It wasn't necessarily any fault of our own. So we were, you know, I constantly keep bringing them in. So it's absolutely, it's that co-creative, how do we work together kind of a thing. They want to feed your families. And to see a kid's face light up when they like finally get where a carrot comes from or something like that. There's nothing that beats that. Right. Nothing.
Well, I feel like I could stay and talk to you guys for hours, but we have a schedule to keep doing. And I want to thank you both for taking the time to join us. And it's been really, really lovely to talk to you both. And I wish you both the best, and thank you for the work that you're doing and for the stories that you're telling. It means a great deal to your communities and to us as a group today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. See you online, Molly.
All right. Yeah. So I'm going to let's see. Sorry, my computer's doing something really weird right now, and so I'm just struggling to. My email keeps opening and like making my screen very small, which is frustrating. Okay, so I'm going to take Winter off. There we go. Okay, sorry about that for a moment. It's just something glitchy sort of moment. Okay, so Renata, I am going to take myself off the feed so that you can introduce Eric, and I will stay off the feed, but jump in if I think you'll be able to hear me from off screen. So I'm going to take myself off for now.
And then if anybody has questions, you can.
Yeah, I'll let you know what questions we have as they come in. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Let me remove.
I'm not sure we can hear you. Hi, Eric.
Hi. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you. Yeah. Jen, can we hear you? Jen, I don't think we can hear you.
Okay. I could hear you.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to stay off, but I'll just jump in. If you ask me a question, I'll just come right on.
Okay. Okay.
Nice to meet you, Eric.
Nice to meet you too, Jen.
Okay. So we have Dr. Erick Gordon, who is a dear friend. And Eric was an English teacher for many years in the New York public schools, middle school and high school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he also became a professor in Teachers College for English education. And he's going to tell us a little bit today about his experience of food writing. So before we dive into the content that we're mostly interested in, I just wanted you to maybe tell a little bit about yourself, how you're spending your quarantine days, if your relationship to food has changed in the last couple of months, and yeah, how you're spending your days right now.
Absolutely. Well, first I have to say, Renana, we're spending so much time on Zoom and in these online meetings, and you have the single best background of anyone I've seen so far.
Oh.
I mean, you're framing. You're in that beautiful kitchen studio of yours.
Yeah.
And it shame puts all of the rest of us to shame. So I moved out. I left New York last August, and July actually moved to Sonoma County, California, to Santa Rosa, and have spent the year here. When the quarantine started, I'd been planning a garden, but the quarantine started and I just went into high gear. I've got my 2 daughters and my wife here, and we've spent all this time creating a garden. It's the first garden. I'm very much a New York City kid, and it's the first garden I've ever made. And it's been magical. And I spend hours every day out there, watching these tiny little growths
start growing. Yeah, very exciting.
I mean, it's magical. I just had for breakfast, I had a smoothie with kale and mint and different things from the garden that I'm already harvesting. So, I know there's so much tragedy and suffering right now, but we have been very fortunate to have a safe space with family and to really connect with food in a different way, connect with the soil in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it ties into our discussion for the last week. So going back to your career as a teacher, why do you think it's important to teach children food writing? And how does it carry over to the skill of writing in general? Yeah.
So why, I love that you asked me that question. Why is, I feel like as a teacher educator, is the question that we should always be asking about anything dealing with our curriculum. It's the question to lead with. And there's so many reasons why with food writing. One, I'm straightforward. I love writing about food. All different, from food journalism to poets who write about food to novelists. It's something that I enjoy. And I tend to think we as teachers, when we can animate something because we love it and it connects with the students, it's such a double bonus. But as far as really the why, I think the most fundamental for me is there's a kind of presence when we are being with food in a conscious way, that it requires us so many, especially as we progress, so many of the things we ask students to write about, they become more and more abstract. Every year, we, more into abstract thinking, and which makes sense. Those higher skills are required, right. But unfortunately, sometimes at the cost of a very concrete kind of presence. So when we write about food, we are right there. You have to be there with your food to write about food in any way. If we could be, writing about, it's such a great challenge just to write about flavor, to describe food, the sensory experience of food. So there's that piece that's about the concrete, about presence. And then, there are all the wonderful skills of description, and descriptive language that we bring students into. And it's challenging, ask a student to describe a flavor, and that requires a lot of creative thinking, right, and a lot of imagination. Right. So there's that as well. And then I guess the piece that our foods our lives are so connected to food that we can't live without food.
Yeah.
And there's so many complications to food. There's so many joys and wonders. And there are also, things that we should be very conscious of. food politics, the justice of food. All of these things are so important, and connecting kids with not just food, but where their food comes from, and what are all of the systems around that, and so just a general understanding, and how understanding food helps us understand our bodies, helps us understand our worlds. And I think writing, when we do it in writing and not just speaking, it helps us process it in a different way and internalize it in a different way, because we're with ourselves, we're reflecting with ourselves.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the experiments you've done with your students when you started writing about food?
I just thought of this. My demo lesson, I started teaching 25 years ago. I think this is my 25th year, maybe 26. And the demo lesson that I got hired, when you go in to apply at a school, you create a demonstration lesson.
Yeah.
And the demonstration lesson I created was about food. And I didn't even remember that until right now. And it was about, food became a springboard. It was a humanities class, and they were studying ancient Greece. Okay. And so I brought in Kalamata olives.
Yeah.
And I talked about how Kalamata olives are cured the same way now that they were 2,500 years ago, at a different scale. But, if you're dealing with organic processing, it's the same curing process. And so I had the students taste a Kalamata olive and then close their eyes and imagine, because they were reading a book, young adult fiction about ancient Greece. Okay. And I had them imagine that the flavor that they were tasting on their tongue was the exact same flavor that someone tasted 2,500 years ago. And so food becoming this imaginative springboard into history. Tasting food is one of the things I just have always loved doing with kids. And sometimes, you have to give kids, if you're going to do something like tasting olives, half the kids in the class are going to find it really repulsive, probably. Yeah. But, if you take it on in a playful way, and, you can take your napkin and spit it out, and that's okay. Right. But still, let's hone in and describe this flavor. Right.
But even a negative reaction is something interesting to write about or to think
absolutely. About. Yeah. I've done things with food and memory and storytelling where, we would fill brown paper bags with little bits of peanut butter, different things that had a strong smell that would probably be pretty evocative. Did a project once where we brought senior citizens in with 11th graders. Really, wonderful kind of intergenerational storytelling project. Yeah. And we did that with them where they would take turns closing their eyes, holding the bag to their nose, and then telling whatever story came to mind. So the idea that food can be so evocative, which I think anything that's sensory is. So there's storytelling, and then we would have them take that storytelling to the page. Right. What does it mean to tell a story and then to write that story, as you really have some time to process and think about? Those are, I think it's the sensuousness of food that really attracts me and attracts me as a teacher as well.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about Quarrying the Apple, your project with the middle schoolers. We did put some of the samples that you sent us by email. We put them online for the teacher, so some of them have read some of those. But maybe start from the beginning so we can hear the whole process.
Yeah. So I was an English teacher, and I was a middle school and high school English teacher, and I was very interested in genre, teaching writing by genre. Yeah. But when I first started teaching, those genres were massive. I would teach students nonfiction as a genre, fiction, and now I think back and think, wait, nonfiction is half of everything that's ever been written in the history of the world. How can we call that a genre? So I started creating this almost funnel of sub genres because they became much more accessible in models. If you're thinking of the text as a model. So I was always looking in the world for examples of great writing that, even if it was a really funky sub genre, and I would say, wait a second, how can my kids do that? And that process of saying, how can my kids do that? I start looking at, well, what are the skills required to be successful in this professional author's example of a genre? So I started that process, but then I was reading, it actually happened, I was reading the Time Out New York, and this is probably sometime in the late 90s is my guess. So we're going back a ways. Their Best of New York edition. And this was when, yes, this was kind of pre-internet. Some people had their AOL accounts, but and those were annuals. Those were, and they were fly off the shelves. They were the most popular. The Village Voice did it, Time Out New York, all of these. And so I'm reading them, and I'm laughing as I'm reading them on the subway into work. And and then I start thinking, well, why is this so compelling? And so there are all these elements that are really compelling to me as a reader. And I thought, you know what? This, when I was teaching 8th grade, I thought, this is perfect for 8th graders. This kind of, this idea that they have expertise, they have original insight, and they can share it in a way that's compelling. So best of, not just review. I mean, review, we'd have nonfiction up here, probably editorial, and then review. And then we go down another, and we've got best of review, which is really a very focused subgenre. And then we started to study this as a subgenre, and students would write. I mean, I always described it as the project. Well, ultimately, we published these as books.
Right.
And these books, then, we had a printer publish them. They had professional, they had a binding, they had ISBN numbers. We went all out.
Yeah.
Took us a couple bake sales to come to that point. And the kids, once they knew it was in a book, the level of work that they put in, this, once they knew they were writing for a very real audience about something they cared about. So I as I would talk about this to other people, I would refer to it as, it's kind of like Zagat's, but by 13-year-olds.
Yeah. Which is a very great perspective.
Yeah. And we would spend a lot of time. And my idea was that you could integrate. So once you had, a book becomes this kind of vehicle of motivation. When kids know they're going to be in a real book that's going to an audience.
Right. It's kind of like being on stage on a play, that somebody's going to watch you. And
absolutely. And somebody that matters. One of the things I find about the school literary magazine, and I'm not knocking them, they're wonderful very often, is that kids get them, they flip through quickly, look for their friends or themselves, and then they put it in the desk and they leave it there.
Right.
There's not a very real audience. So in thinking about genre that way, I was thinking about, well, who can you write for as a 13-year-old?
Yeah. Who
can you connect with where people aren't like, oh, that's a very skilled Romeo and Juliet essay that you just wrote. But, these essays would come in, these Best of New York essays, and I would laugh out loud.
Yeah.
And my kids would surprise me, and they would delight me, and they would inform me. I actually went to some of the places that they would suggest.
Right.
So we then turned this into an annual book that, the 8th grade class would make. We had a distribution committee. Kids would, all the local cafes and bookstores, even a couple like corner bodegas would carry copies of our Coring the Apple. So it was, how do you connect your knowledge? And they weren't just food. Food was a big part of the review unit, but it expanded. It became about more things. Kids could, they could offer some insight, that was very personal, or we started to categorize, but food was always the biggest one. But once they knew they were connecting, with we called it a tourist audience.
Right.
Once they knew they were connecting with that audience, revision became real.
Yeah.
Enthusiasm became real. So I thought of the book as this kind of, it's almost like the book is the engine driving the train.
Yeah.
And then I have all these skills opportunities. So I was teaching about, structure, concision, persuasion, but very advanced elements of persuasion for 8th graders.
Right.
Where before that, I was teaching persuasion in these essays that I dreaded getting those back from the students, and the students dreaded writing them, and now I was able to teach those same skills transposed onto this thing that they were passionate about.
Right.
And so that book ultimately became a larger program that I took up to Teachers College. It was, it was first my dissertation, and then it became a nonprofit.
Yeah.
The Student Press Initiative just published recently the 450th book. So that Coring the Apple got very big. There was, really fun. And if people in the class are interested, I put a few up there. Just give me a shout out, and I'd be happy to give you a PDF of a whole collection. Because I think one of the things that when we're using food writing as a model in the classroom, we want to find great accessible models, but then the students' writing becomes a great accessible model for the next class.
Yeah.
So one thing I would always do is keep a class set of every Coring the Apple, and that became part of the next year's study. So I just say that because if people are interested, I'll send you a PDF and you can play around with this idea of best of. Actually, I just worked with a teacher in Sonoma who did peeling the grape. I do a lot of work with teachers, professional development, and they took the idea and localized it, made it relevant to Sonoma County.
Yeah, that's great. Jen, do we have any questions that anybody wanted to ask Eric?
So I've been checking a lot of comments, and a lot of people this is resonating, the idea that authenticity is so important, that it's easier to write something about, when you're passionate about it. So more comments than questions at the moment.
Okay.
Another food writing project that I did that I really loved was the storied cookbook, which I think that has become more and more. Alice B. Toklas, actually, her autobiography, I think it's called Cooking with Alice B. Toklas, or maybe the Alice B. Toklas cookbook, I can't remember, published 60 years ago or something. And she was Gertrude Stein's partner, and just, in this very, very funky Parisian scene, when, Picasso and Hemingway, all these, it was a very artistic scene. She wrote this memoir that was it was posing as a cookbook, but it became about the stories of her life. And so that's another example of this wonderful genre that professional authors have created, that we can then, borrow, good artists, but what did Picasso say? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. We can take those ideas and then just work them at a level that's accessible and works in our classroom. And that could happen on a 4th grade level, 3rd grade level, or a college level, where, there are oral history cookbooks. There are these wonderful ideas of how we can celebrate food culture through story.
Yeah, and you had shared one of them I saw was the Raymond Carver story. Not Ray Car. Yeah, what is the name of that again? That
A Small Good Thing.
Oh, I don't think I can read it anymore. I think I read it the last time before I had kids, and I'm not sure I can read it now.
Yeah.
It's so incredibly powerful. And if anybody hasn't read it, grab some tissues and then sit down and read it. But it's just, I had forgotten actually how much that moved me at a time where I wasn't thinking about the food part of it, but food being such an important part of that story. I mean, it's all about this cake, and it's just so emotional. So I appreciated you sharing that, because I think it is probably one of the best examples of the emotion that you can capture through something as you know, as like a birthday cake.
And that food can be, after everything else, you know, there's food.
Yeah.
That, you know, in times of tragedy, in times of desperation, you know, sometimes we eat unhealthily, we binge eat, but there's, you know, there's that very powerful thing of, you know, I would sit down when I was sad as a kid. I'd sit down at my grandmother's table, you know, and she'd make me matzo ball soup, and it really, you know, it sounds cliche and silly. There was nothing that would make me happier.
Yeah, it can bring about so many emotions. And actually, Renana, I know you said that you were happy to skip cooking, but maybe you can share while we're on. Maybe Eric. I love watching Renana cook, and especially in that kitchen. She I don't know if she's like well lit or if she's just like gorgeous, but she always so good.
It's so good.
Both. But you were going to share a recipe with us, and I think it would be worth doing still, if you don't mind.
So I'll start it. I'm not sure we're gonna get to do all of it, but it's a great way to transition from Eric's grandmother and the matzo ball soup. So I am going to share with you a tomato and pepper sauce, which in my mother is originally from Tunisia, and in her language, it's like in Italian. I mean, she spoke Arabic, but they had a lot of you know, they had French and some Italians in North Africa. So they call it just salsa. And the salsa is it's a staple in their cuisine. You can break an egg into the salsa and make a shakshuka, or they would cook fish in it. And it always has a couple of very basic ingredients. It would always start with peppers. Just some bell peppers, and always some spicy, you know, jalapeno or whatever you have at home, and tomatoes. So I have some for us here, and I'm just going to start, and I can share the recipe with you a little bit later. Here, I'll just move my screen so you can see everything. And I thought it's also a good way to start to talk a little bit about seasonality, because even if we're speaking about North Africa, they didn't have tomatoes and peppers all year long. So what did they do? So of course, in the summertime and early fall, they still had these, but they still loved these flavor and they wanted to keep cooking with them. So the peppers, I remember my mom telling me how they had a whole process they had an abundance of peppers in the summer. They used to dry them up. They just put them on big trays in the sun to dry up, and then they would grind them up, and that was what paprika is. So in the wintertime, they would cook with paprika instead of fresh peppers. And same thing with tomatoes. When they had them fresh, you know, available tomatoes in the summer, they used those. And then at the end of the summer or in the fall, they used all the tomatoes they had and cook them down until they made tomato paste. And they were able to keep that, add some oil to it and keep it for much longer, you know, and use it throughout the winter months. So those are the two main ingredients. They added garlic. Sometimes they added onion, but not always. And then in the wintertime, my mom always told me that they, just to liven up the sauce a little bit so it won't be just the tomato paste and the paprika, they also put some carrots in there too. So that's the basic ingredients of the salsa. They always had some cumin and some caraway seeds as well. And when I start cooking this, I immediately think about my mother and my grandmother. My mother eats very spicy. She always used to make a portion for her and then another dish for the whole family. Because I really can't eat that spicy. So she still, she thought about us how, in our palate. So you really I'm going to start it. We just have a few minutes. So usually make it in a large skillet. And you add a little bit of olive oil. Not a little. You kind of have to be generous with olive oil. I shouldn't have said little. And you start cutting up your pepper. I have 2 peppers. I'm just going to cut them into strips.
Before you do that, Renana?
What is it?
Can you hold the peppers up to the screen a little closer? We were talking about description of food.
Right.
They're so beautiful.
They're so beautiful.
Gorgeous, a gorgeous vegetable. Sorry for interrupting.
No, not right. So I'm going to cut these into strips. And usually the peppers are the first things in, unless you're using onion. If you're using onion, then you want to put the onion in first. And then the peppers go in, and the peppers are going to cook for about 7 to 10 minutes, sometimes even a little bit longer if you have a lot of peppers, because you really want them to soften up. And my skillet is still warming, so I'm going to.
And I was, you brought those peppers close to the screen. I think there's a comment here about just the sort of the beauty of a bell pepper. But one of the activities that my son had to do recently was about the color wheel, using all the different items around the house, which was fun. But I'm not sure I'm loving all these activities that I'm like, oh, I have an entire kitchen table of everything from around my house of different colors. But the idea of sort of those colors are so vibrant. It would be very cool to kind of see what other oranges are like that. If you could find another orange that matched. Right. The orange of that
a little bit to me, it looks a little bit like a clementine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the way that different foods, the foods that are sort of the colors that are lacking in our food world are really interesting. Like the lack of blues, for example. There's so few blue foods.
The rarity of blue.
Yeah.
I love what the teacher said, that comment that came up before, because writing about food, just to hone our observational skills, to really start to notice, the contour of a pepper, that the unique color, that red that would be so difficult to reproduce in any medium.
Right.
Yeah.
So my peppers are going in. And I have a mixture of some tomatoes that I got from Misfit Market. I don't know if anybody has experience with them, but I love Misfit Market, especially
just through you. I think in the summer when we did our class with at your studio, you had a whole bunch of produce from Misfit Market.
It's so great, and they're getting better and better in terms of that you can actually choose what you're getting. It's not.
And the idea is that it's produce that might not sell at a market typically, right?
So it's supposed to be ugly fruit and vegetable. Most of the time, it's just fine. I have found some things not to be the freshest, but you can't beat the price. It's really affordable. And you get some really interesting things. And it's all organic. And those things would be trash if somebody like us didn't get them. So, yeah.
I had a question about the way that you get kids to sort of go a little bit deeper in terms of their connection, because a lot of times, and I did mention this on, I guess it was just yesterday when we were having our small group discussions, Renata, that, the idea of food memories, when you ask a kid to make a connection to something that they ate, they think about something they ate last week, or, it's sometimes hard to get that deeper question. And one trick I've just done with adults is to say okay, that was your first memory that came to mind. What's your second memory or your third one? And by the time you get to the third one, that's when you get to the real nuggets of things. But I'm curious about tips for working with students and children and sort of getting them to explore those areas and dig a little deeper.
Is that a question for me or for
Yeah, that was a question for you. experiences, or like, are there ways that you've questions that are really well asked, to get kids to open up?
Well, I think, when we prioritize one sense, it's very helpful for some people to quiet the others. And schools are very loud and distracting places. So, if we're using smell, I would likely turn out the lights in my classroom and even have the students cover their eyes. And really, do some visualization helps too. I mean, there's a lot of research on how memory is enhanced through guided visualization. So, if you want to bring people to a certain place, you can start to coach them there, So imagine students closing their eyes, quieting the room so that, and really dramatically, like we shouldn't even hear, the scraping of a pencil. And everybody's eyes are closed, and you start to narrate a place that you're bringing everyone. Step into your kitchen and open the fridge and take out and really bring them into that. And I think that's a really nice way to help people access food memories.
Yeah, like a guided tour through your kitchen, and yeah.
That's great. That's really smart. Renata, when you eat this dish, what's a memory that it brings back for you? Is there something in particular other than just that it reminds you of your mom and grandma?
Hard, because it's something that my mom has been cooking and I have been cooking for so long. So it doesn't attach to one certain memory, because it's so many memories together.
That rye bread article, just while you're thinking, it was so interesting in that we shared a story that was posted on I think it was Splendid Table.
Yeah,
the Splendid Table podcast about rye bread, but it was just the way that she wove. There's so many like individual memories attached to this one thing that was, she's probably been eating every day with her husband.
Yeah.
There's the memory. There's something about using the social world of the classroom to help people access as well. So if we start, all brainstorming memories, when I hear your memory, it might springboard 3 of mine. So sharing that publicly in the classroom is such a great way to enrich people's. I used to talk about it as shaking stories loose from the trees.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm thinking about you're talking about your mom and your grandma cooking together, and sort of what the things are that that would be like pervasive through my kitchen, my parents' kitchens.
So you're asking me about a certain memory. So it's not exactly this, but it's something that, because you can cook this sauce and you can keep it in the fridge and take it out whenever you want, and then make something like add an egg to it, and then it's going to be a new meal. So it reminds me of, so my family lives in Israel. They are Jewish Orthodox, so they don't cook over Saturday. And then I remember it's a very certain type of hunger at the, when Shabbat ends on Saturday night. And you kind of, you've had all the food that was cooked on Friday and on Thursday for Shabbat, but then, you're waiting to eat something that's fresh. You don't want to eat like the leftover chicken or the rice or the challah. And on Saturday night when Shabbat ends, sometimes my mom used to make us shakshuka from the sauce. So she used to take that out, and that was an exciting new meal. It wasn't a leftover anymore. So it's nice. Yeah, and I didn't think of, so thank you for making me think about it. Yeah.
Good. And so how do we finish this up? So you cook the peppers.
So I'm cooking the peppers. I'll show you what they look like now. These probably need about 5 more minutes. You do want them, I'm cooking it on medium high. And you want the peppers to soften, but also to get a little brown. Then you would add the tomatoes, or I have some fresh tomatoes and I have some crushed tomatoes. And you add that on. You let it cook for probably around 20 minutes. You add some salt to it. You cover it up and you just let it cook for those 20 minutes. Then I would add some crushed garlic and some cumin and caraway seeds. And maybe cook it for another 5 minutes. And it's ready either to just dip with some hummus or on its own, or to take it to the next step.
Yum.
Well, that made me a little hungry now. Well, Eric, thank you so much. Did you want to say something else?
I just wanted to say that, Renata and I, we've been friends for quite a long time, and our kids grew up together. And there is no one in the world whose cooking I enjoy more than yours.
I
really
agree more.
Coming over to dinner at your house has always been a treat for me.
And it's more than the food. I had the pleasure of eating at Renata's. I don't know when that was, Renata. Was that just this winter?
Yeah, it was a few months ago, I guess.
Yeah, and it was more than the food. There's something really special about your kitchen, Renata.
Yeah.
Thank you for cooking for us, Eric. It was such a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for sharing. And for all of you watching out there, thank you for tuning in. And for those of you watching later, we hope you enjoyed. And please feel free to ask questions. We can pass things along to Eric. And Renata, you'll share that recipe.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the classroom. Awesome.
Okay.
Perfect. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.